Kia ora and welcome to Sector Report and the conclusion of our special investigation into complaints about the behaviour of the big banks towards the farmer clients they've loaned money to. Some farmers are being forced off their farms as land values drop below the level of the mortgages held over their properties. First up, we call in on a small meeting near Rotorua of farmers hurting from their bank's demands. Behind the low-key statements lie some strong emotions. And we travel to meet up with Putaruru farmer Cameron Bishop, who has $12 million in assets and debt of $7 million, yet he's staring down the barrel of receivership driven by his bank. Then we talk frankly to one of the big banks, Westpac, as it stakes out its position from the banker's side of the divide between bank and client. But first, we're off to Rotorua. Farmers' vehicles line up outside Alan Crafer's house south of Rotorua to talk over what they say are big problems with the banks. Under the guidance of Gray Eatwell, a Southland farmer campaigning for what he says should be a better deal from banks for farmers, this small gathering lets farmers get their frustration with the banking suits off their chests. There's mention of farmer suicides. Stress hangs heavy in the air.
They start off quite low-key, saying you might have to sell something, sell one of your farms, and then you'll keep the rest. And gradually they get worse and worse, and in the end you see the whole plan and you see, no, you've got to sell everything. Because my equity is very similar to my debt. I don't see it as a problem because I'm paying my bills, I'm paying back loans. I've paid 1.6 back in capital, and I've now been put on I have no overdraft. That's all paid back, and I'm now being put onto a principal repayment program. So I see myself as absolutely sound, top customer. However, my equity's terrible. So they say, you must sell.
Well, it's arbitrarily terrible.
It doesn't fit their plan.
It doesn't fit their plan. It goes back to what you were saying. The Australians have said, I think they've got a different reason. I believe they want to take money away from us and invest it in China because there's better returns. And they've actually missed out on a bank in Singapore or something the other day. But whatever, they're taking money out of New Zealand and Australia because our returns aren't very good compared to Asia. So that adds up to 4 or 5 billion, which comes off the high equity people because then their books look better straight away.
North Wairarapa Hill Country farmer Jeanette Walker is the go-to woman for farmers wanting advice. She appeared in the first of our 2 special Sector Report programs on rural banking. Jeanette says she's about to lose her farm after her bank forced her into selling, although she says it'll finally go at a ridiculously low price, which will drag down farm values for dozens of her neighbours. Over the past 5 years, she's been relentlessly critical of the banks.
They hate their brand being damaged. That's their Achilles heel. They absolutely hate brand damage, and that's really the only way to get them to listen, at least. And they're very aware of the stresses they're putting on farmers. They put their bank managers through suicide. You know, some farmers have committed suicide by bank, and the bank managers are put through programs to deal with customers that commit suicide as a result of a phone call or a letter or whatever. So they are aware, but it's just a strategy, and you're dealing with people in credit that actually have control, whereas in the 07-08 it was the lenders of banks they were the big boys. Now it's the credit control guys that have the muscle, and whatever they do and say, if they expect it. If they say jump, everybody says how high, and they're now getting paid bonuses to take money back. And by the same token, the bonus system for incentivised lending is still going on.
The politicians come under withering fire from Jeanette Walker too. She says they're doing nothing to take action on banks calling in their loans and forcing people off the land.
You've got Bill English he states categorically that he doesn't believe regulations have altered bank behaviour, that bank behaviour hasn't changed. It has changed drastically. Like in your case, you know, you've got no overdraft, you've paid off 1.6 million and you're working on reducing principal debt yet again, and you're being made to sell. It's just nonsense. It's just an absolute nonsense.
Philip Berry is a local Reparoa dairy farmer who's now in strife with his bank. He says his farm too is under threat.
Production has dropped, but we've also had some severe pressure come on to us with banks because of that drop in production, because what that effectively has done is upped our indebtedness per kilogram of milk solids. Now, we sat at one stage, we were sitting at just over $30 a kilogram of milk solids worth of debt. What we did 18 months ago, we started to become under quite severe pressure from banks because of this. And I must make the point, at no stage whatsoever have we ever missed a payment. We continue to pay our bills. Our overdraft is always kept in check. But what has happened since then is the bank considered that we were in negative equity. Now, the reason they considered that is they assumed a value that was on our farm that was somewhere quite substantially less than the $6.5 million that it was valued at 3 or 4 years prior. Now, our indebtedness, if you work the figures, our indebtedness at that stage was just over about $4.3 million on a $6.5 million farm. They assumed that the farm was now worth around about the $4.5 million. They imposed, they told us that we had to get a valuation, which we had to subsequently pay for. That valuation came back at $4 million for the farm, so of course it crystallised their thinking that we were, in their eyes, we were, our indebtedness was, well, we were 100% indebted. We had no equity left in the farm.
But it's not just former share milkers like Philip Berry who have fallen foul of what they call the bank's aggressive rural lending last decade, loans that in many cases are now being called in.
Now you've got another lot of bank customers that are 3- and 4th-generation farmers, who have no debt. After 3 or 4 years of drought, they've now got considerable overdrafts, which they've never had before. And they can't fund their overdrafts, and their overdrafts have rolled over, and now they've got core debt. And I know 4th-generation sheep and beef farmers, well-established families, that are selling shares, anything, just to be able to keep their farms running.
And a final word of advice from a woman who's been to hell and back as she received generous loan money from a bank about 5 years ago, only to now lose her farm because she says that same bank maintains her farm's now worth less than the money she owes it.
You just got to keep on hammering them, and I think the biggest thing people do is they're just scared of standing up to them. Well, what are they going to do to you? They've already done everything else.
Some sage advice there from North Wairarapa farmer Jeanette Walker, who's about to lose her farm. Next, we visit a Putaruru farmer who faces the same fate, despite being millions in the black. Lincoln University graduate Cameron Bishop farms 2 properties in the Putaruru area of South Waikato. This one just 57 hectares, 110 cows and some maize. The other farm's much bigger at 212 hectares with a 750 cow herd. Calving is split between autumn and spring. Cameron's also run quite a big contracting business around the district, but no more. With $12 million in assets, paying their interest on time and having just spent $215,000 on development from cash flow, Cameron thought they were getting to where they needed to be as a business. But now receivership looms. He says the bank doesn't communicate with them and apparently doesn't want to be involved with the business.
Currently we've got $12.5 million worth of assets and we owe our bankers $7 million.
And they're not happy with that situation?
Apparently not.
Got $5 million in credit?
Apparently not, no. They would prefer to see us gone.
And what reason do they give?
We've never really been given a reason. There's issues with another associated business that we had, which was a contracting business, which went into they put into receivership.
So in terms of hard, cold numbers then, what's your debt and equity situation?
We lost $500,000 to one big customer, which then prompted the bank to put it into receivership. They didn't like the contracting, so it was easier for them to get rid of it and potentially get rid of us completely.
So you're really saying their ultimate aim is to get rid of you?
I think they have to, because they're over-borrowed in the New Zealand market.
Do you think that applies just to that bank or to the industry in general?
All the banks, because every bank's got different scenarios. I've personally been affected by 4 of the banks through people not paying, or business partners who were under pressure who couldn't fulfil their obligations as shareholders of other entities.
So it had a kind of ripple effect on you?
It certainly does.
So despite being $5 million in the black, the bank still won't finance his business. He says he can survive if he can raise funding offshore, and has found a source which is promising, apart from one little hitch.
We're pretty close to having something sorted. We're 90% of what we need, we're pretty sure we can get. They've only come back with one question, and that's how we're going to fund the 10% shortfall.
How do you think you will?
Well, if our existing bank would help us out and keep the stock and plant and equipment as security, it won't be a problem.
But why won't they accept those as security?
Well, they would. That's the exact security a share milker has. While this isn't a share milking scenario, it's within normal share milking terms.
And still no dice?
Not at the moment.
Talking to Cameron about where he thinks rural banking has gone wrong, he echoes the comments of many others, that last decade the banks were far too aggressive in their rural lending. For instance, in a scenario a long way away from current banking practice, his bankers came knocking on his door offering money, which he accepted.
They got over-focused on lending money. They forgot about customer support to existing customers. A perfect example is when we wanted to do a $1 million development around the farm. It could have all come out of cash flow until the payout went down. We asked our manager to come and have a look at the project, and he was always too busy. At the same time that this was happening, we've seen a deal come across the desk from the same bank of a 90% borrowing to a customer who was not that bank.
With the particular bank you're with at the moment, did you go to them or did they come to you?
They came knocking on our door. They were chasing plant and equipment finance, and being a contractor as well as a farmer, we had plenty of that. We knew the plant and equipment finance manager who we dealt with, and we also knew one of the rural managers from his time as a dairy company representative.
And so obviously they used that connection. And did they do a fairly hard sell?
They did a very quick sell. Dad had been with a bank manager for 15 years pretty much, and he couldn't match the deal, and his advice was it's too good to turn down. So begrudgingly we went, and we didn't want to leave who we were with, but we did go.
I notice you're with Open Country Dairy, not like the vast majority of farmers who are with Fonterra. Do you think that's a black mark against you in the eyes of the bank?
Unfortunately, at the moment it is.
Why?
Open Country was simply underperformed in the last 2 years.
And therefore, the payouts haven't been good enough?
Yep, that's right.
But Open Country Dairy's CEO, Steve Smith, dismisses Cameron Bishop's claim of underperformance. He says if you take out the figures for shareholding and dividends, the company's payouts have, on average, been 7 cents higher than Fonterra's over the last 5 years. In the many conversations with people in preparing this program, one theme came through, that the banks used to use production as the main criterion for granting loans, but these days, those in the know say equity is the main factor in deciding whether to grant a farmer credit.
I think the equity thing has always been there. Typically farms, if they've averaged 2 to 3% on actual production profit, they've done quite well. Most farms, being our family included, has grown on on land value. So the economics of farming isn't really looked at or even understood by some of the bank managers. A friend of mine asked his bank manager, what's the cost of grass, the true cost of grass, and the guy couldn't tell him. Now to me, if you're looking at production systems, and there are a varied nature of them, you've actually got to know what grass is worth.
Well, what do you think's driving the banks to call in money like they're doing in your particular case?
They've simply lent too much into the New Zealand economy. I think they've got issues and having lent too much, so they've just got to call some in. And there are scenarios where they're going to lose money, so to keep their balance sheet in check, they actually have to get rid of somebody who is in a good position.
Well, how much of this is driven by bonuses, or perhaps what you could call incentive payments, for those lending officers at the banks?
My understanding is, and knowing several bankers personally, that there are big, well not necessarily big, but payments made on lending money, and at the moment there's one particular bank who is paying a 50% premium to their managers to get the money back in. So ethically, where do they stand? They're not there to look after the farmer, they're there to look after number one. At the top of the list is going to be themselves, then the bank, and then the farmer.
So finally, Cameron, what's the scenario? What are the options that are available to you?
Well, basically we've just got to keep trying and keep hoping and keep getting out of bed every morning and keep ringing everybody you can think of with some money and not give up.
You don't have a lot of options, do you?
We certainly have no options right at the moment. It's looking pretty grim, but hey, we can give them 90% if they hang on to 10% for a little while.
Cameron Bishop there, keeping his chin up despite a bleak outlook. When we return, we give the floor to one of the big banks, Westpac, to learn more about the banker's perspective. Welcome back. Next up, it's time to hear from the banking industry. I'm joined in the studio by Westpac's Agribusiness Chief, David Jones. Well, Dave, thanks very much for coming in here today for Sector Report on Country 99 TV. Now, there's a fair bit of noise coming from quite a few farmers, a minority, but nevertheless quite a few apparently, about their treatment by the banks. Now, looking at it from an industry point of view rather than just Westpac's, do these complaints have substance?
I suppose first, John, thanks very much for inviting us back.
Pleasure.
Look, I think, like you say, it is a minority of farmers that are actually having some stress with their relationships with bankers. I can really only talk around a Westpac perspective, although they more likely will flow into the general industry. But when you have a look at the farmers going through stress, yep, there is some issue there, but we've got to remember too, there's more than two parties to this. You've got to have a willing borrower, you've got to have a willing lender, and there's financial advisors in these transactions as well. So you've got accountants, solicitors, and farm advisors there. So unfortunately, the banks have a tendency, because we make up quite a significant cost in their profit and loss statement. Indeed. We have a tendency to focus the blame on us. But no, you've got to have a willing borrower before you can actually enter into any type of agreement or provide funding.
I mean, I guess in any situation where one human being lends money to another human being, you're immediately going to have the possibility of a fairly fraught relationship, although fortunately often they're perfectly happy relationships. But I guess in farming particularly, would this be more of an issue than, say, in commerce generally?
No, I don't think it is at all, John. I think you see it right across, whether it's a residential borrower, commercial borrower, retail, and also flowing through into the agricultural market. There is always going to be stress. There is always going to be a minority that will actually suffer a little bit more at the hands of economic and climatic conditions, and we're seeing that happening. And I suppose it becomes a very emotional play, particularly when things aren't going quite well for you, as to whether you stay in industry or whether you have to exit the industry. And because the industry has such passion for what they're involved with, it makes it very difficult to make that exit move.
One big gripe does seem to be the lack of a written record of an oral agreement, which means the situation can get very confused when the bank makes a move against a farmer. So I guess you're getting lots of shades of grey when there's no written record. Does this actually happen, do you think, with the local bank manager just not recording things on a file?
Our mandate for our managers in the field they are to record the discussions. If there's a change in terms, a change in funding, a change of business activity, then we actually communicate back to the customer to make sure we have a clear understanding of what's going on there. And sometimes that's communicated back into what we refer to as a letter of offer, which schedules out the new terms and conditions of funding or finance.
Right.
So we try and make it very, very clear so parties don't have those grey areas.
I guess once the letter of offer goes out to the farmer, though, there must be more negotiation then?
Sometimes there is more negotiation. It just really comes down to how the individual parties have actually understood the original discussion.
So it's not always a cut and dried, take it or leave it?
No, it never is. There's always room to negotiate, and it may be around structure facility, it may be around security, it may even be around pricing.
There's also been unhappiness about files being reallocated from the local bank manager to head office and away from local staff. So obviously that gets in the way, I guess, of a long-standing relationship between farmer and bank manager. Has that been happening? We do remove files to specialist care units, and those guys are looking after... What do you mean by specialist care unit?
Well, you'll see some of those customers generally have got a lot more stress in their business and they may not have accepted their position, so therefore we try and bring an independent body into the discussion, because sometimes the field officer or the relationship manager becomes a little bit close with the customer, and the discussion is not necessarily heard, or the comments are not interpreted as the way we'd wish them to be interpreted. So therefore we'll bring in a specialist who has a very strong understanding...
On your own staff, though?
Of our own staff, who has a very strong understanding around the industry and around their business, and we also make sure that the local manager is always involved with any communications or with any discussions or industry information that's required to make informed decisions.
Now, what about some of the other claims that are being made by farmers who have spoken up? I mean, there's overdrafts being cut, forced sales of stock, part of their land, maybe even a whole farm. What are you hearing on this from the bankers' side of the equation?
Well, again, I can really only talk around the Westpac. We certainly haven't had those situations. There will be changes in facilities that are provided because the conditions of the relationship have deteriorated, or the customer's in such a stage that they can no longer borrow any more money. But our primary objective is to make sure that the property is maintained to a reasonable standard, and the well-being or care of the livestock. So I'd be surprised that we would actually see people pulling overdrafts or pulling facilities that was to the detriment of the physical farming side of it. It's simply what does happen in these situations, and sometimes we don't get the full picture disclosed to us, is that they've gone through and done some other...
there's got to be honesty on both sides, doesn't there?
Yeah, they've maybe done some other activities and used cash that was supposed to be used for the farming operations, and they've I suppose streamed it out to another investment or done something else with it. But I'd be very surprised to see that facilities are cut or withdrawn to the detriment of the farming operation.
Is it very often, though, that you do have to say to a farmer, I'm sorry, mate, you're going to have to sell X number of head of stock, or you're going to have to get rid of that little bit of land down the back, or indeed we're going to have to force you off the land? I mean, does this happen very often? Look,
no, it doesn't happen very often, and we have those discussions, and what we try and do is bring independent parties to the table. So we will encourage the farmer to go to their accountant, to a farm advisor, make sure that they understand their financial situation and the way they're farming the property, to make sure that they are doing the right things, as opposed to a banker coming along and say, well, no, you've got to sell this down and get rid of livestock. So we will basically support them through the tough times, but there has to be a stage where you say, well, right, the business is no longer viable, you're actually destroying your equity, so it's time for you to make a decision to protect your business. So we will encourage them to make that decision themselves, and sometimes we have to help them with that decision.
What about the claim that, in fact, a lot of these difficulties between client and bank, farmer and bank, can be sheeted home to aggressive lending through a lot of this decade?
Look, I don't really think that's the case at all. Again, it comes back to
well, they were some of the banks, not necessarily Westpac. In fact, I've been told by one source that, in fact, Westpac stood right back from this whole race for market share. But that there were some banks out there who were lending very aggressively.
Look, I think you have a look at what's happened in the market. You had a strong market, so you've got, again, it comes back down to the point that you've got a willing buyer, you've got a willing borrower. They do an appropriate level of due diligence based on cash flows, capacity to service, whether the farmer's a good physical farmer or not, what type of controls he has in his business, and then you have a look at the security side of it. So those transactions, and at the time when they were made and the decisions were made, were more than likely very sound decisions. You go through a global financial crunch and the whole world changes. Commodity prices cross, currencies move. We're seeing countries, Ireland, Greece, in stress, and we've got to expect that there will be some casualties in business.
It's got to be a ripple effect back here, doesn't there?
Yeah, there has to be some type of casualty. It's got to be.
Yeah. Okay, well, look, thank you very much. Unfortunately, we're already out of time. It seems to have gone very fast. But look, thanks very much for your time today, David. Appreciate it.
Thanks very much, John. Pleasure to be back.
David Jones, Westpac's agribusiness chief there. None of the other big banks provided us with spokespeople, but did give us statements. The BNZ says it has a strong appetite for the agricultural sector, and its lending practices focus on security, cash flow, and the people factor of strong management and good governance. The BNZ says it shows solidarity with the sector when the chips are down and provides financial assistance packages, occasions of credit at cost, and advice. The National Bank, owned by ANZ, says it lent over $2 billion to help farmers get through the recession last financial year. The National says, "Our aim is to keep farmers on their farms, which is in the customers' and banks' interests. However, in a small percentage of cases, the right decision for the customer may be to look at other alternatives, such as selling up, rather than go deeper and deeper into debt with no foreseeable way out." ASB says dairy farming is its largest industry segment outside household lending, and the bank says selling a business or its assets is always an absolute last resort. Neither the farmer nor their bank achieves their goals when a business runs into trouble and is sold. ASB continues to support farmers wherever possible and will continue to look to assist those customers facing hardship as a consequence of unexpected economic or climatic factors. And that's part 2 of our 2-part special investigation into rural banking and tales of farmers who have fallen foul of their lending practices. I'll be back soon with another edition of Sector Report, and remember, you can catch up with the program on our website. Catch you next time.